Okay, so no new patches or anything, but what we are talking about today is going to be all of the spoilers for Set 2, Omens of the Past. There have been a couple of cards spoiled already. We talked about warp cards previously, Hipshot and whatever it is familiar, you know, the familiar. And we've talked about those cards already, so I'm not going to talk about those ones, but there are two new ones up today. And there's also one that was spoiled sort of through Scarlash on Discord. And yeah, we're going to talk about the first one first, which is the one that was spoiled by Direwolf on the Reddit, and not the one that was spoiled by my team RNG Eternal. And we're going to go ahead and talk about that one. So with that, let's go ahead and make the magic happen. There it is, Calderan Cradle. For every 5 spells that you play, this relic reads. And let's move it up a little bit so it's above my Twitch logo. There we go. Cool, cool, cool. For every 5 spells that you play a 5/5 dragon with flying. So there's a couple of cool things going on here, and a lot of interesting stuff. We had a pretty good idea that Skycrag was going to have a Spells Matters theme. And it may not be the central theme of the list. Like, we know that there are some good, like, burn down cards. We have Alpine Tracker as one of the initial promos for the Skycrag set. So it's not all going to be spells. But Skycrag definitely does have a pretty decent focus on spells. And this one is really, really interesting. Now, the first thing that I want people to think of when they look at this card is, what if you had a card that just said, pay 4, and get a 5/5 dragon later. And that's all this card says, because realistically, if you're playing this card in just an average everyday deck, you're paying 4, and then later on you get a 5/5 unit with flying. And it might not actually be too close or too far away. Like, essentially, you probably play like 2 spells a turn in a Skycrag deck, so you might see it in 2 to 3 turns. That is not actually awful value. Having multiple units appear at the same time in a particular turn is actually really quite devastating on occasion. Like, it means that certain decks just can't deal very well, single target decks basically, anything that has a lot of control elements to it. They need to spend their power very efficiently, and if they can't deal with Calderan Cradle, then they don't have any way to necessarily deal with both the 5/5 unit and whatever it is that you're playing on that turn. So there's sort of this tempo like shift, this tempo lurch that you create with the Calderan Cradle in just a normal everyday use of this deck that creates a minor amount of advantage for you. So 4 cost, it's a suspended 5/5 dragon. That is actually pretty efficient. That's something that if you're just like on face evaluating this card, you say, okay, this card is going to be a 1-for-1 with one of their attachment destruction things, which, like a Banish or something, that would be okay if it did that. Or it'll be something that creates a unit later that they have to deal with, and that unit is going to be pretty efficiently costed. It's going to be a big flyer. They'll absolutely have to deal with it because big flyers are scary. They do a lot of damage. The main issue, of course, is that a 5/5 dragon does not get past Sandstorm Titan. So on board, that can be a little bit awkward. But overall, this unit is probably going to trade with stuff. It's probably going to present some sort of threat which your opponent has to deal with. So yeah, on average, looks like a pretty decent card. Of course, this card is not really designed to be in the average case. And even in the average case, just getting a single 5/5 dragon is not an effect that you're going to play an amazing amount for. What you're trying to do with this deck, of course, is to play multiple spells, to play a lot of spells, and to get a lot of dragons. And just one thing before I talk a lot about getting a lot of dragons, let's actually show that dragon, because I've got it. There it is. And we're just gonna, just gonna show this off and move it up a little bit more. All right, so this little buddy, there's a couple of reasons that I like this. It's colorless, which is actually interesting. A colorless dragon is, well, it does suggest that dragons are in fact like colorless as a rule, which is kind of interesting in terms of flavor perspective. Another thing that's really important to consider is that this dragon is not annihilatable. You can't kill it with Annihilate. This is something that people missed about Veteran Merc as well. You cannot annihilate a colorless unit, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that you cannot annihilate a colorless unit. I guess that's actually something that I should test a little bit more, but the last time that I did, that was how it worked. And yeah, it should be units with only a single faction, or Annihilate is something like that. Yeah, so in any case, dragons are apparently colorless, and that makes sense from a lot of perspectives. Like, we know that dragons are all colors in some senses. Nyctotraxion is an all-color dragon, and she's the quintessential dragon. Curiox is a two-color dragon, but Curiox is the type of dragon that is, you know, like the knowledge-based dragon, and does some cool things that way. But yeah, it's pretty cool, and the thing I really like about this, which Made just now is pointing out right now, is the art. This is really rad art, and this is like a thing that you can do with tokens that has been experimented with before, but it's always nice to see, which is that you have Calderan Cradle, and the Calderan Cradle is a really sweet piece of art. We actually saw, I noticed this art earlier. There was a big preview of it a while ago, and I was like, oh man, that is just amazing art. The art for Eternal is getting so much better, and the 5/5 dragon token is just a top-down view of that same dragon, and that's nice. Like, it's really nice to show that these two cards are connected through a visual effect. This is just always something that I really like, and yeah, it's great art. The dragon's really cool, so yeah, that's pretty spectacular. We'll move that out of the way though, because Calderan Cradle is going to be the focus of the space. Okay, so talking about getting as many spells as you want. Now, the thing that's been pointed out very clearly is Echo. Obviously, if you're playing a deck with a lot of Echo cards, those decks tend to have a lot of really good spells in them that can be played for cheap, and also that you have a lot of. And also, if you're playing Second Sight, you can get more and more of them. You can play a ton of spells all the time. So playing spells with Echo is pretty much the first thing that you want to do with a card like Calderan Cradle. And doing that, you'll probably get at least 3 dragons a game, I would say, in a circumstance where you are alive and you're playing your spells efficiently. We don't know what kind of spells you're going to see, but a Skycrag burn deck is a pretty simple archetype, and it's something that can exist. We just had a game where we played against that, and somebody was echoing, trying to get echoed obliterates and doing all sorts of cool things. Elysian Trailblazer works really well with this deck, and the thing that I actually really like about this design is that it is a design that okay. So one of the things that I'm really on the lookout for in Omens of the Past is any card that the design in some way supports Carpet Shuffle, because Carpet Shuffle is my baby. And as you know, Carpet Shuffle is the deck where you're playing a blue and currently red and yellow deck, and you're trying to basically just waggle around in your hand and shuffle around on the carpet and build up static bolts. And you're also echoing a bunch of stuff. You're making incredibly cheap stuff. And yeah, no, this is definitely something where a Carpet Shuffle deck would love this. First off, Carpet Shuffle decks don't do a lot on turn 4. They don't have much that they really are interested in doing on turn 4. They have Nesting Avasors, but they'd rather save them for later. They have like other cards that are kind of defensive, but Calderan Cradle's probably not a bad thing to do when you're just taking a turn off. And like turn 5 is your Trailblazer turn, or turn 6 is. You're mostly playing early spells early on, so this is something that could fit pretty easily into that curve. The second thing is that that deck has an infinite combo where you are trying to draw your entire hand, and during the course of that, you're having like a little bit of trouble getting things off the board. You aren't necessarily able to generate your lethal or your win condition immediately. When that happens, if you're playing 0-cost Second Sights with Echo, and that kind of like overall setup where you're just trying to draw infinite amounts of cards, and you're just drawing to the max hand limit every turn, and then you're like, okay, I don't quite have my kill condition yet, but it's coming. Don't worry about it. I've definitely got this game. Having a couple of 5/5 dragons that are just appearing as you are drawing through your entire board, that's pretty nice. So a spell-heavy deck where you just don't have any type of natural defenses, Calderan Cradle generates those defenses. And it's not just Carpet Shuffle. Any sort of burn or removal control deck, if you are just basically trading card for card on everything, Calderan Cradle is eventually going to get you enough advantage and enough of like a big threat that you are gonna be able to get some damage through, and you're actually gonna like be able to push. So with control decks, what you usually need is some sort of large evasive unit to finish off the game, because if you're just playing trading card for card, you don't usually push through enough damage to quite finish. So a card like Calderan Cradle, if you have the enough spells in the set, which it seems like in Skycrag there's gonna be, that's something that you can use to really push through that whole setup. Something Music asks, do you think there will be balance changes with existing cards along with the Set 2 release? It would not surprise me, but I think that there have already been a lot of those made in advance. For example, they nerfed Rapid Shot in advance because they knew that was something that was going to restrict their design later on in the set. I think that more likely most balance changes are going to always come in the form of cards, but there may be some slight changes, yes. Set 2 seems like something where you would do that kind of thing. Yeah, so Calderan Cradle has like a lot of, like, any sort of cool combo deck is going to kind of want one of these. It is interesting in that it normalizes these decks, and it makes them actually more legitimate, because what it is doing is it's rewarding you for playing spell-heavy decks that are otherwise a little bit difficult and a little bit unreliable, and it gives them some level of reliability. There are obvious weak points to this thing. It does not do anything to the board state on turn 4, which is the Sandstorm Titan turn, so playing this on the second play against Sandstorm Titan can hurt quite a bit. There are times where you're just not going to have time to play Calderan Cradle, and when that happens, it'll hurt. The other thing is that it is a counting deck. I don't know how it's going to count. That probably will have to have some sort of visual effect associated with it, which is kind of interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing how they do that. I'm guessing it'll just count it on the relic. But it is a counting deck, so similar to Feln Cauldron, if someone destroys this on the turn that you would otherwise actually get the dragon, that hurts you a little bit. It's not actually card disadvantage, although a card like Furnace Mage can certainly, you know, make that hurt. But it is something that, like, basically you have to keep an eye out for. I think this is less of a problem than people realize, just because most of the time you're going to be like, okay, play Calderan Channeler, play a big spell, and then play 3 little ones. And, you know, like, if people are, like, trying to wait for that turn 4 where you've spent the most amount of spells, you're not really actually going to be spending spells inefficiently. That's not the goal of this card. So, something to consider. All right, let's change it up. This part I actually have to do kind of manually because I haven't set it all up. So we've got another Xenon dude, or not a Xenon dude. What is the name of this guy? Blood. I wrote like a tiny piece of the article about him, or rather I wrote a bit for the round table about him, so I should know the name, but we got Bloodcall Invoker. All right. And I'll change the other spoiler to the Restless Radiant, so that we can see that. But we'll let you look at that for just a second. Okay, so Bloodcall Invoker is our Life Force card, and it is our Life Force demo. And what it reads is, at the end of your turn, play a Restless Radiant with power or strength and health. Old magic ways. Strength and health equal to the health that you have gained this turn. It is an uncommon. Yes, that is true. Kind of an interesting draft uncommon. This is a 5-cost 3/5. 3/5 is a really good stat line. A 3/5 hybrid card is one of the most indestructible stat lines in the game at the moment. And the fact that it costs 5 actually makes it immune to the latest of the removal cards, which we'll be talking about in just a little bit. But yeah, it's very hard to kill. You have to kill it with Death Strike, you have to kill it with Obliterate, you have to kill it with Feeding Time. And that's about like the only 3 things that can kill it in a 1-for-1 trade. So Bloodcall Invoker is a card that sticks around pretty well. You need 6-drop cards or 5-drop cards to kill it. There's not a lot of efficient ways to deal with a Bloodcall Invoker, and those cards will typically go away. Ah yeah, Suffocate does kill it, that's true. But everything dies to either Suffocate or Vanquish. There's no way around that, so. In any case, Bloodcall Invoker is pretty likely to stick around in a Xenon deck. And yeah, so Life Force, we haven't talked about this yet. Life Force is, whenever you are gaining health, it is relevant in that fashion. And actually Life Force, I guess we don't really have to describe it, because the Life Force ability here is something that is just keyworded, and what we're actually seeing is the ability is described in the text. So, for the amount of health that you gain at the end of a turn, it will give you a Restless Radiant. And this guy's sweet too. This is really good art. I like Bloodcall Invoker's like cool spirals and everything, and I also like how they're mirrored in the Restless Radiant. So I think they're doing a really good job of demonstrating that kind of stuff. Here, let's blow this up a little bit because it's awesome. Whoa. Okay, yeah, this guy's pretty great. Yeah, so Restless Radiant is like a really cool example of the Xenons. It is both the purple and the yellow Xenons. We've seen both of these Radiants before, but it's also like, yeah, it's just a cooler dressing on the Xenon character, and in general, like, it's pretty neat. The Radiants are really interesting. I want to see more about them in the lore. I'm pretty excited to see more about them, so yeah. Restless Radiants are apparently 3-cost units. That's something, I guess. It'll probably be relevant for certain things, but something to know. So yeah, this works for any type of life gain, including Life Steal, including Luminous Defender, including Healer's Cloak. If you put a Healer's Cloak on a Bloodcall Invoker, it'll be a 5/7, and then you'll also get a 7/7 Restless Radiance, so that's a pretty cool deal. If you do some type of multiple life gain effect, you only get one of them. So if you play 2 Waters of Life, for example, then you'll get a 6/6 and not 2 3/3s. That's not how that works. So yeah, you will play a Restless Radiant at the end of turn that is just big and nasty, and most games that you're playing with a Bloodcall Invoker deck, there's probably going to be at least one way for you to gain life. This works with a lot of small life gain effects that are already in the game, including Devour, Vara's Favor, Stronghold Visage is kind of a cute one. There are a lot of ways to just sort of generate like little bits of extra health, and Bloodcall Invoker can really capitalize on those to create just annoying little dudes that are pretty difficult to deal with. So I like a lot of things about Life Force. I'm more excited about the design of Life Force in general than I am about the card itself, but I do think the card is pretty interesting, especially as a draft uncommon. Like, as a draft uncommon, this guy supports yet another cool draft archetype, and draft is already such a special place right now. It's like, I've mentioned this before, but I do think that Eternal has one of the best, like, the best draft environment I've ever seen. It's absolutely spectacular. And now we're supporting life gain cards, of which there are already quite a few in set 1, and there are a lot of interesting ways that we can actually do some cool things with this card. So yeah, Bloodcall Invoker is actually fairly cool just because he's an uncommon. But he is a relatively indestructible card, and he's a card that supports you gaining a lot of health. I think one of the things that this card will bring back is the old, like, people are still figuring out what to do Hall of Lost Kings decks, where you are just trying to gain a whole bunch of health and play Hall of Lost Kings. Bloodcall Invoker supports that strategy by actually doing the one thing that life gain cards don't do, and the thing that makes life gain cards in general very bad. It actually creates presence on the board. Any type of permanent effect that you can develop out is usually better than just gaining health, because those things continue to build your advantage on the board. This is something we talk about very early on in Eternal Basics, that you want to be able to build advantage more than you want to just gain health. But gaining health is nonetheless pretty useful. Being able to counter out certain aggro decks and burn decks is actually like a really good way to like basically prevent aggro and burn from taking hold and becoming too unreasonable. And Bloodcall Invoker is very good at that. It's a defensive unit. It stands in the way of most things. It's not rapid shot immune or anything, but it's usually going to be able to soak a couple of hits, or you can just sit there and completely ignore them and just gain a bunch of health with cards like Sanctuary Priest, cards like Water of Life, cards like the Force Field if it ever comes back. There are a lot of really interesting and dumb things that could be pretty amazing. Oasis Sanctuary will still be bad, but you know, it'll be something. So yeah, Bloodcall Invoker is a really interesting card. I'm pretty pleased with it. You can read the whole spoiler article in which Neon discusses all the cool strategies with it, has some cool starter decks with it on rngeternal.com, and I have some notes on the bottom there as well. I think I go into a little bit more how I think that this kind of increases the strategy of Eternal, and we'll talk about that here too. But basically, like, if you can expose and leverage all of the different resources of Eternal, if you have all of these different levers and knobs, and if you're playing with all of them, if you're interacting with all of them in your meta, if your meta is somehow able to play burn decks, play life gain decks, play unit decks, play spell decks, play basically like things that are really hybrid, or things that are like doing weird things with power, or things that are just, the more different things that you have, the more interesting the meta gets, and the more just amazing it can be. Like, there's just a really good amount of variance in Eternal and Eternal decks, and this is something that aims to increase that variance in a really fascinating way. So it's going to create more interesting experiences, and Bloodcall Invoker creates really interesting decision points for both your enemies and for you. Like, how much health do you want to gain a turn? Do you want to gain little amounts of health or big amounts of health? Do you want to try to focus on life gain and getting those Restless Radiance, or do you want to play out your units and develop things with skills, things with other abilities? On the flip side, does your opponent want to try and kill the Bloodcall Invoker, or does he want to try and get past you? Like, the Bloodcall Invoker is usually the right decision, but if you're gaining a bunch of health every turn and your opponent has an Obliterate and you're at, oh, I don't know, 31, and he can obliterate you down to 25 so that you don't Hall of Lost Kings next turn, does he do that, or does he kill your Bloodcall Invoker? Like, what's the best option? So yeah, like I think there's going to be some cool things going on there. That's kind of a weird scenario, but like I think that there will be a lot of those scenarios where what you do with the Bloodcall Invoker is going to be pretty relevant, and like how many units you have on the board, the size of the units. There is a way that this card really shapes the board, and that's pretty neat. 5 mana 3/5 is a bit weak as a base, but the fact that it does not die to much is very important. So yeah, that's Bloodcall Invoker. We have one more card which has been around for a little while, but I haven't talked about it yet, so we are going to talk about that as well, and that's Banish. So we'll go ahead and get the Banish. I think this is actually the card art. Oh, it's huge. It's huge. Just take a moment to enjoy that extremely enormous eye and not spoil what the card text shows. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the actual card art, but it might have been a mock-up. I didn't see the actual spoiler, so no guarantees on that, but I'm almost 100% sure this is the actual card art. Scarlet spoiled this in the discard a while back, and here it is, a fast spell. Whoa! That kills. Hold on, there we go. An enemy unit or relic with cost 4 or less. And one of these days I'll get the actual size right. Here we go. Cool. Alright, so, interesting things about this. This card is flexible removal in Xenon. And in that way, it's actually kind of interesting. It focuses similar to Feeding Time, in that it is a card that gets rid of most things and has like some extenuating circumstances that makes it better in some ways than a Death Strike. So we now have 3 Death Strike style cards. We have Feeding Time, which is the purple-blue version that kills something permanently by turning it into a pig. We have the Death Strike itself, which is a fast spell. And we have Banish, which has a couple of restrictions, specifically that cost 4 or less thing, but also gets relics. And relic attachment destruction is pretty important. Like in general, we do want to be able to kill relics. This doesn't kill weapons, so that's actually kind of important. I think the last time I read it, I thought it read attachments, but no, it is units or relics. So, the thing about this card is that it is a card in 2 colors that kills Sandstorm Titan and kills Xenon Obelisk. So if you don't like time, this is probably the card for you, because those are 2 of the cards in time that need answers the most. And yeah, it will kill relic weapons, absolutely. That is something that's fairly important. So, here. So basically, like, it'll kill Sandstorm Titans, it'll kill Xenon Obelisk. This card, however, is not a card that you are going to be using to win the game, because it doesn't do anything for you that is specifically efficient. Like, basically, it is always killing something that costs what it costs or less. So it's not going to do anything crazy, but disabling a Xenon Obelisk disables, like, basically if you can keep the Xenon Obelisk down, tokens decks are so much less scary. There are a lot of Xenon Obelisk decks that play cards that aren't actually valuable without Xenon Obelisk, or much less valuable than any other counterpart with a Xenon Obelisk. So being able to blow up any sort of relic that just completely shapes the game is really important. Like, basically, Banish is going to get rid of cards that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily be able to kill, and in the situations where it isn't able to get rid of those cards, it's still going to be able to get rid of cards that are actually real threats to you. So it's going to be able to kill Sandstorm Titans, it's going to be able to kill Champion of Chaos, it's going to be able to kill a lot of the big 3 to 4 cost bombs that you really, really want to get. And sometimes it'll just kill like a Silverwing Familiar that has a Deep Force Blade on it, or something like that. Like, you will be able to use this card to save your games and to prevent yourself from losing. It is not a card that wins games, but it's a card that prevents your opponent from winning games, and that's something that's very relevant and very important. I don't know how much play this card will see, but I imagine that Xenon doesn't have a lot of problems with unconditional removal at fast spell speed at a cost of 4. Like, that's pretty decent. This card is definitely quite capable of getting rid of a lot of things that are pretty bad for you, and as a result, it can really do a number. There are a lot of 5-drops that Banish would really like to kill, but the fact that it doesn't kill them isn't really a point against it. I think that overall, well, it is a point against it, but it's not going to be the killer point against it. Banish is definitely going to see play. It's going to be a very common card in Xenon Xenon decks in general. And it's a really interesting card for the faction. I think that level of toolkit will just allow Xenon decks to have just a little bit more focus, and that's pretty neat. So yeah, I like Banish quite a bit. Yeah, so beyond that, we have the warp mechanic stuff. That's already up on my YouTube, so we've talked about that a little bit, and I think we've talked about that at length, in fact. That pretty much does it for the card breakdown spoilers. So I'm recording this for YouTube, so for the YouTube people, thank you for watching. And feel free to like or subscribe. For the Twitch people, we're gonna get back to some games. So see you guys in just a bit.